Good morning. I'm Margaret Spellings. On behalf of myself and my fellow co-chairs, Jim Steyer, founder and CEO of Common Sense Media, and Deval Patrick, former governor of Massachusetts, welcome to the Future of Tech Commission's Texas Town Hall. A special thanks to our outstanding speakers for helping guide today's conversation, and to all of you for joining us today. It goes without saying that tech is an essential tool in everyday life. Unfortunately, as the pandemic has highlighted, tech is still not accessible to everyone. More than 9 million of our fellow Texans are without broadband today. That's why we at Texas 2036 spearheaded the Digital Texas Coalition, whose work was critical in crafting House Bill 5 that will help close the digital divide in Texas. However, addressing broadband gaps is only one of the critical steps we must take to shape our tech future. This is a multifaceted industry, and challenges and opportunities abound. That's why I'm working with Jim and Deval on the Future of Tech Commission, and why we need your help to develop a bipartisan, comprehensive tech policy agenda. Following conversations with the White House and the FCC, our task is to build a set of recommendations that will advance policies along 5 critical themes: digital equity, innovation, platform safety, market competition, and privacy. These are issues that affect everyone. Unfortunately, today, we worry about our identities being stolen, American views being manipulated, and American students not attaining the technical skills and education needed to compete for future jobs. In many ways, our democracy, economy, and safety rest on us finding the right solutions to these challenges. That's why we're gathering information from experts, policymakers, educators, industry leaders, civic groups, and the public. We're doing this through interviews, written submissions, and virtual town halls like this one. Each town hall takes on a specific issue. This morning, we'll discuss digital equity and tech innovation in our education and workforce systems. Other town halls will focus on topics like privacy or platform safety. The public is invited to join any town hall and to submit ideas and testimony through our public feedback forms. One final word to underscore the importance of public input. Each town hall will feature expert panelists and Q&A among the panelists and with you. Below this screen, you should see an interactive panel where you can submit questions during the town hall and answer an audience poll question aligned with each speaker and panel topic. We may not have time to get to every question today, but know that all questions and comments will be collected by the commission. After this event, we'll send you a link to a feedback form where you're encouraged to provide more in-depth comments on today's topic or others the commission is covering to inform our final report. You can follow our work through our website at futureoftechcommission.org. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Texas Education Commissioner Mike Morath to get us started.
I reflect on this question of students and the work that we do for students to equip them for a digital future with a bit of reminiscence on my own past. I think I was about 6 years old, and we had a computer in the house. For those watching this, nerds of a certain age, you might recognize a TRS-80, what we called a trash 80 back in the day. And to this day, I don't know why my parents had that in the house, but we did, and I found it, and I read the manual that came with it and began writing code directly into that computer. It was BASIC, the programming language. And not every student had a computer in the house back then that they could tinker with and experiment with. This evolved over time, and I even ended up volunteering to help in my middle school with our computer science teacher, set up the computer lab and actually conduct the lessons. This issue of equitable access to these kinds of resources, making sure that kids while they're at home have access to this kind of technology, so that they, not just digital natives with a phone, but can explore and expound upon this. And then the work that we do in our schools to make sure that we can formally reinforce this, because the little budding nerd that I was at 6 was massively supported by my high school experience, because I went to a high school in Texas that had 3 years of computer science training. And at the time, I think we were only one of 5 campuses in all of Texas where you could take 3 years of computer science. So when I think about the work that we need to do to continue to make progress for kids in their level of preparation for a digital world, one, you've got to make sure they've got access to the hardware and software ubiquitously. That means at their school and at home. It means internet at home as well, because they got to tinker in the evenings and on weekends and in the summer. But it means also ensuring that rigorous coursework is available and ubiquitously available every school, elementary, middle, high, with properly trained and supported teachers that can do that work. And it's not easy to find teachers with a computer science or tech background, because the private sector constantly beckons. So this partnership work that you see in schools all over the state of Texas between private sector employers who make their employees available on a part-time basis to help support this kind of instructional activity, this is critical. What we've done in the last year is made, and in fact over the last several years, has really made major dents in this. Through partnerships with major employers, we have massively expanded the number of trained teachers, instructors, available to Texas schools, both who are physically present at the school and who can then appear virtually as long as the schools are wired. Something like 99% of the campuses in Texas are all wired on fiber, high-speed internet, fully ready to go. And in the last year, because of Operation Connectivity announced by the governor and supported all over the state, we have purchased 4.5 million learning devices, so laptops, iPads, Chromebooks, so that every single student in Texas should have access to a learning device at home now, even if they didn't 12 months ago. That's amazing progress. We also made a huge dent on at-home broadband internet access with something like 800,000 hotspots deployed to ensure that kids are connected. Now, there is more work to be done, but this is what we need for the future. We need to make sure that our kids have access to the hardware and software they need to grow, both at school and at home, and access to trained instructors to support them in their learning journey. And that is exactly what we're doing in Texas.
Thanks, Mike, for those comments today and for your leadership proliferating devices and hotspots across the state through Operation Connectivity. I think we all see the value of technology. Before I turn it over to Evan Smith, CEO of the Texas Tribune, to moderate our first panel discussion to ensuring tech equity and digital access for all, I want to remind you to submit questions and answer the audience poll questions. With that, Evan, over to you to lead this conversation about how we can address technology gaps and cultivate digital connectivity.
Thank you, Margaret. Madam Secretary, Madam Co-Chair, so pleased to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm especially pleased to be joined for the next half hour plus by 3 distinguished panelists. We'll have a great conversation before incorporating your questions at the end. Nicole Anderson is Assistant Vice President of Social Innovation at AT&T and President of the AT&T Foundation, overseeing the communications conglomerate's philanthropic initiatives. Alfreda Norman is Senior Vice President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, responsible for community development and economic education, among other areas of public outreach. And finally, Wynn Rosser, CEO and President of the TLL Temple Foundation, a nearly 60-year-old charitable organization headquartered in the East Texas town of Lufkin. Good morning and welcome all. We might begin by talking about the current state of digital and tech equity, a small question, right, that I'm sure you have no thoughts about, because, of course, the topic of this conversation is so important, and there's really a lot of directions it could go. But I thought maybe I'd ask each of you to give us a sense, high level, of where we are from the standpoint of digital and tech equity in this country. Alfreda, I'll ask you to go first, then Nicole, and then Wynn.
Well, sure, thanks. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. Well, I think we all can recognize that we are in a technology-enabled, disruptive, innovative world.
Right.
AI, globalization, automation, this is really affecting the labor market as a result. And so this is sort of the nexus of equity, is people want to have a good job that can allow them to do all the things that we want to do in pursuit of the American dream. So knowledge and skills are getting obsolete at a breakneck pace. And it is imperative that workers and those students coming through the pipeline are adequately trained and skilled to keep up with the 21st century demands of what's needed for jobs. So the equity part is, are we all coming to this on an even playing field? Are there some that are on third base, some on first, and some not even in the ballpark? And that's what we have to talk about, because we have to recognize for productivity, for the prosperity of our economy, we want everybody in the game so that we can have full employment and full prosperity. So that's the question.
Assess that though. So you say some are on third, some are on first, some are still in the bus waiting to enter the stadium. Be specific. Who is not yet in the game in your mind?
Who's not yet in the game? So some call it the bottom of the pyramid. Low income individuals, people of color, those that have been affected by structural barriers that have been embedded in our policies and practices for years, are not in the same place.
Well, we're going to call out specifically why that is and the obstacles to getting them in the game here shortly. Nicole, let me ask you to take the same question. What is the state of digital and tech equity in your mind? Who's in, who's out? Where are we?
Sure. No, I think Alfreda summed it up very nicely there. And I would add to that, that there are about 17 million children. I know the number fluctuates a little bit, but 17 million children in the United States who aren't right now connected to the internet. Either that's because of availability or affordability, but when you go through a pandemic, when everyone is now learning online, 17 million kids is a tremendous amount. And to what Alfreda was saying, those who are most impacted by that are our very vulnerable communities, right? So 1 in 3 of those children are children of color. You have your English language learners, you have foster students, you have rural children. I'm sure Lynn will speak to that too. So there's a large group of students. Obviously you can say, well, technology also didn't fail a lot of folks during this pandemic. We're happy that the networks were robust and were able to live with the demand that was put on it, which was exponential in what we saw. But there still is those kids, especially those 17 million students who aren't yet connected, and we need to get them connected.
Right. And of course, you talk about connectivity, Nicole, but one thing I know we'll talk about over the next 30 minutes or so is the fact that it starts with connectivity. But even if you have connectivity, if you don't have access by way of a device, that connectivity is for naught, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And then I would say the third leg of that, right, is you need the connectivity, you need the device to access it, and then you need the training and the digital literacy to understand how to work in that technology robustly and have it work for you, either in getting a job or in learning. So there's multiple pieces to making that successful.
When Nicole, of course, teed up the fact that one way we are not in a good place in terms of equity is along geographic lines, right? So we make assumptions that everybody has access to the same stuff, but we live in a state, Texas, you and I do, others on this call do, where we have big cities and we have vast stretches of the state in rural communities where there is not equitable access. And that's a problem, isn't it, in terms of the current state of things?
It is a problem, Evan, and we have to first say that this is not only a rural issue. It showed up in urban places as well. I think Alfreda nailed it. It is an equity issue. 25% of kids in Dallas ISD, primarily South Dallas, didn't have the internet, access to the internet when the pandemic started. 40% of the students in Aldine ISD, that's the unincorporated Harris County area that surrounds Bush IAH, so urban Harris County, primarily Black and Hispanic students, and most of whom are low income. And it was okay. People accepted that as the status quo. We have rural districts here in East Texas that were unable to deliver any new content between March and June during that robust online learning time that Nicole mentioned. because so few teachers and students had physical access to the internet. So you've got to have the connection, you've got to have the physical access to minimum 25.3, always on, fixed signal. You've got to have a device. So think back to rural electrification, a model that's often used with access broadband. It'd be like having a refrigerator in your kitchen, but unable to plug it into electricity. So a device without a connection is little good. And then we need to be able to use those digital tools to the highest and best value for the future. And it's like saying that 10% of our state, 90% of rural households, 90% of the households that are disconnected are rural. It's like saying they're not connected to the 21st century. And that's not okay. It's like saying the entire state of North Dakota doesn't have broadband, and that's okay.
Well, you wouldn't deny people access to water. You wouldn't deny them access to electricity. Why should we deny them access to information? Why should we deny them access to a way forward? In some ways, this gets back to the whole internet as a utility conversation, which could derail us. But you make a good point, Wynn. It's not just about connectivity and it's not just about device access. It's also about digital literacy. Even if you have connectivity and you have the device, if the systems are not set up so that people know what to do with that connectivity and that device and how to take best advantage of it, that's a problem as well, is it not? And there's an equity through line there too.
Indeed. Well, the commissioner, I understand his video was interrupted, but he talked about the major progress that was made this year. And he also reflected on his own childhood when at the age of 6, he was able to start coding on a TRS-80. Those machines came out in 1977. So, call it mid 1980s when the commissioner was doing that. Well, 35 years later, that privileged experience that some children had finally got shared with the entire state when we went one-to-one with devices. But, a tablet and a Chromebook and those aren't necessarily the same kind of device when you're talking about research and paper writing. It gets you connected, but is it the kind of device you need to do the kind of learning appropriate for your age and where you are in your curriculum? We haven't, and really we haven't talked about higher ed. I know about only half the students in community college in Texas had access to the internet anytime they wanted it at the start of the pandemic. And so you think about, you can't write a research paper on a smartphone or really even on an iPad. And so the device is appropriate to what the student needs is really important. And also, although we've reached this one-to-one point, we had about 400,000 students. Just last year's kindergarten class was about 400,000 students. We're adding 400,000 students every year. Those devices have to be maintained and updated. And so this is not a one-time problem. This is something we need to be thinking about in terms of the future, especially if we want young people connected to the careers of the future, which are more and more technology-based and automated.
Nicole, I want to come back to what you said about the pandemic in a second, but Wynn's point about smartphones really reminds me of the pictures. They haunted me, honestly, over the last year of kids during the pandemic having to stand outside their shuttered schools after hours on their smartphones doing homework, connecting to the Wi-Fi network in their school after hours because they didn't have Wi-Fi access at home and they didn't have a device better than the smartphone. We really can't run a country as big and as proud as this country if we're asking kids to do their homework on their smartphones using the public schools Wi-Fi network after hours, can we?
Well, you bring up what is the homework gap, right? So I think what you're speaking to there, which existed before the pandemic hit, right? The homework gap's been talked about by the FCC before that. And I think obviously the pandemic hit, we had everyone going home and all of a sudden it shed light on what has been an issue for a long time. So the homework gap is exactly that, right? Where an individual doesn't have connectivity at home to be able to complete their schoolwork. And when all that goes online, that becomes very difficult. One of the solutions there, or one of the ways we're approaching that is through we announced last month a $2 billion commitment over 3 years to bridge the digital divide. And a piece of that is to we're piloting 20 learning center, AT&T connected learning centers, working in communities where we can provide high-speed connectivity in those community centers. So it is a place you can go to get access and to have access to learning resources, and also to do that digital literacy we've been talking about. And part of that package, that overall commitment too, is just to create those digital learning resources and digital platforms to get to that adoption piece of it. So no, it's a real issue when you can't close that gap.
And that's not your house, but at least it's not the sidewalk outside your school at 11 o'clock at night. Nicole, exactly. You brought up the point about the pandemic. I want to ask you about some aspects of this, all of you, in fact. Nicole first, and then Alfreda. right after that, we saw kids have to go to school K through 12 and higher ed online for the better part of the last year plus. We saw hospitals around the state have access to telemedicine as a way to help people during what was, after all, first and foremost, a public health emergency. Except you can't have telemedicine without we learned the importance of connectivity from a healthcare standpoint. And then, of course, all of us, we were talking before we got on the call today about working from home for the better part of the last year. Some of us still working from home. You couldn't do your job on whether it was Zoom or Slack or anything else and replicate the work environment if you did not have reliable connectivity. At each of those points, Nicole, there were equity issues where not every kid had access to the same opportunity in school. Not every person had access through healthcare to the same opportunity to be treated, and not every employee had the same opportunity to work remotely. That's a problem.
Yeah, and I think it brings, you're laying it out as we've seen it unfold, right? And we've seen it unfold like that in our own homes as we dealt with this. And I think it speaks to what are the policies we can put in place to help bridge that equity situation. And so when we look at policies that encourage private investment, are married up with government policies that do that and create sustainable and long-term funding sources for connectivity, you start to get beyond the Band-Aid solutions really to something that will take us into the future and make sure we do all have connectivity, because we live completely in a digital world right now, right? I notice it even with QR codes when you're going out to eat. The menus now are on QR codes. Well, unless you have a mobile device and to even know how to get a QR code on your phone. Very simple example, but I mean, I think these are just ways that we need to think about this beyond just the Band-Aid pieces we put in place, but really think about a long-term and sustainable solution that's combined. It's a collaborative, right? We all need to be at the table, whether it's the private sector, it's government, it's our schools coming together to solve the situation.
Alfreda, on this question of an equity deficit in these areas, I'm inclined to ask you whether the last year made things worse or whether the last year simply made things visible to all of us that were not visible to all of us before. I mean, the reality is there have always been racial disparities in a state like Texas, say, in healthcare. There have been racial disparities in education. There have been racial disparities in economic opportunity. But it was communities of color that suffered from the standpoint of access to connectivity over this last year. And in those areas, education, healthcare, economic opportunity, Black and brown communities in Texas suffered more than the communities in the main did. So I'm just trying to understand whether it got worse or it simply got visible. What is your perspective on it?
I think the pandemic brought a huge spotlight to the issue.
Yeah.
We've all been talking about the social determinants of health.
Right.
Those are the social determinants of health are the same determinants of educational attainment, starting your own business. It comes to the root cause. And what is the root cause in many instances? It's poverty. It's barriers that are in place that people cannot move themselves. And that's why it's important for the public sector and government and others in policy to think about those barriers and change systems.
Right.
Oftentimes we talk about if only the people could get this and if they could do that and build the skills. It's the system in sometimes. Yep. So this has really brought light to the issue. And by the way, some people have done very well. If you have a college education, you're doing well. You're working remotely. You have little disruption, most likely. But those that are not in the same situation, we have to recognize that is going to affect our economy overall if we don't pay attention. It's not like you can say, well, I'm doing fine. We have to address that the investment in human capital. There are people on the sidelines that are not engaged and can be, and they can be. So I think I think the pandemic has also made us realize the importance of resilience. I think we have to think in this technology-enabled world that we're in, this automation, we have to have automation technology resilience. People have to know that the way that we're approaching jobs, education, health, financial services are embedded in this digital literacy and the skill sets that are needed for the jobs that we need. So we have to retrain. We've not done a good job. if someone's job has changed because of automation, have we set up a program for retraining?
Do you
So
think higher ed,
resilience.
Alfreda, has higher ed done, just a quick on that, has higher ed done a good enough job of pivoting to meet that need? Is that one of the places where we have kind of a break in the line?
I think they're catching up. I think higher ed is one of the last places that's been disrupted. I mean, if you think about all the business and sectors that have been disrupted in the past, 10 to 20 years, higher ed is one of the last bastions. And you can, say, if you are trying to educate people and reskill people at scale, does the present model allow you to do that? I think we've learned that possibly not. I mean, there's a lot of people that have to learn things. They can't all go to a four-year institution. I think our community colleges are doing a fantastic job. So I think there is change and adaptation, but it's not. We have to sort of ramp that up. There's millions of people that need to be, not to mention the pipeline from our pre-K to 14 pipeline. Think of all the millions of adults that need to reskill and stay in the job market. So it's, as Nicole said, coming together of everybody coming to the table, businesses, public sector, higher ed, all of us coming to the table to figure out how to ramp this up, because that's what's needed.
When Alfreda focusing us correctly on the future makes me want to ask you about the consequences of this year, not just today, but tomorrow. We had a certain number of kids depart the public education system of the state over the last year by necessity for a variety of reasons. We had a bunch of kids in higher ed who either slowed their education to a crawl or paused it entirely. The time it's going to take to get them back upright within the system is going to cost us all over time, is it not? The learning loss of today, one of many phrases we've come to embrace commonly over the last year, is going to have a long-term impact that we frankly can't calculate right now.
It will, Evan. And again, learning loss, summer slide, much like digital divide and the homework gap, has been a named phenomenon for a long time. We've known that young people lose ground over the summer. We've known that, going back to Alfreda's base analogy, we've known that some students start out further around the bases than others for a long time. And despite heroic efforts to challenge the status quo remains. And so I think, this is a very narrow conversation about a topic that impacts education and learning. But it's a much larger conversation. Are we willing to challenge the things that are baked into the system that reinforce the status quo? And those forces are strong and they're deeply embedded. But there's ample evidence that all kids can learn, and there's also ample evidence that the system does not treat all kids equally or equitably. So the digital divide, access to technology, access to the internet and broadband are the way it's expressing itself now. But it was expressed as textbooks 3 decades ago. The poor kids didn't get access to textbooks. The poor schools didn't have textbooks. So it is a longer thread than just the last 18 months that when you start pulling it, it really takes you back to some really challenging topics that we've just not addressed in a way that we need to be the Texas that we claim to be, and the Texas that we're proud of.
Well, it's a good reminder that when the pandemic is over, our problems are not. The problems preceded the pandemic. And so it's not enough to simply wish this all away and go, great, everything is fine now, because we have to go back and confront the work that we did not do. Alfreda, what is the proper framework for advancing the cause of digital and tech equity? In your mind, who owns it? Is it government? Is it the private sector? Is it nonprofits? Is it all of the above? Help us understand how to think about what a way forward looks like.
Well, I think we all own it. I don't know if we've all realized that.
Right.
Businesses own it in the sense of they need to think about this not from a charitable or a social justice type of a thing, but it's an investment in the future of their workforce. The public needs to figure out what is the role of government and policymakers. What is the role there? And then as citizens, we all need to think about what do we need from our leaders? in this really important time. So I think we all own it. And I think that, you know, it all kind of goes to the root cause. We have to address disparities. We have to recognize whether it's not a matter of it's your fault, my fault, ancestors' fault. I mean, I'm not in my heart. The point of the matter is there are disparities. They are perceived or unperceived, but they're there. And if we all began to have the same focus of where we can move barriers, where we can think about inclusion as on the forefront of our minds, not to exclude people, I think it would just make us able to address and diagnose the situation. It's hard to diagnose a problem. It's hard to fix a problem if you've diagnosed it incorrectly. And I think that's the conversations that we all need to have is, are we, I don't think anybody in America is against people having access to opportunity and doing well. I don't think anyone wants to not think about growing the pie. So the question is, what do we all agree on, and what is our vision versus the things that you know, that we're squabbling about? And so I think that there's great hope in the fact that we can, once we do get a shared vision, we see it in communities that we're working with, smaller communities on a local level. When you get leaders in the community-based organizations, business people, school people around the table, when you get a shared vision on where you want to go and everyone has all arrows are going the same direction, it's amazing what can happen. In fact, it's quite remarkable. So I think we all own it, and I think that we all should have motivation to own it.
I will acknowledge what you said about you can't solve a problem unless you diagnose it, but you can't diagnose a problem unless you acknowledge it, Alfredo, right? And it's going to first take us all saying these things out loud, that we have a problem to solve to begin with. I'm conscious of the fact that in the Texas legislative session that's about to end, there was a meaningful discussion for the first time in a while of broadband, right? At the federal level, the president's broadly defined infrastructure plan includes a significant investment in broadband. Both the state and the nation are saying out loud that we have a problem to solve. So in that respect, maybe that's a positive, right? We're having the conversation. When we've talked about this many times, you know, I am old enough to remember when government solved problems. And I now think often that government doesn't either have the appetite to solve problems or doesn't have the resources to solve problems, or both. And it often falls to philanthropic institutions like yours to step into a place where government once played. Is that a significant part of this answer? You personally have been at several different foundations where I've known you in leadership, an advocate for this conversation around broadband. That's made a difference. That's moved the needle. Does it take an army of Win Rossers, of institutional philanthropies to solve this problem?
Well, I'd say there's a role for all the sectors that you started with and that Alfreda referenced in her response. Philanthropy has a role. We know we've been supporting the work of Connected Nation Texas to develop the maps and the data that became the maps of record. Started pre-pandemic, but during the pandemic for sure were a great resource to policymakers over the last few months. So that's a good role for us. But I know here in our 12 counties where we've been supporting our Council of Governments to develop a 12-county plan to connect 60% of the households to a fiber backbone with a fixed wireless distribution signal. That's $110 million.
Yep.
That's not something that we could do. That would be 5 years of our grant making budget, and that means we wouldn't be focused on health or anything else.
Right. There's not enough philanthropic giving to solve a problem that big on its own. So, but what can philanthropy do? The mapping, the data, the study, the feasibility work, just like we've done here in our home 12 counties. But we spent $1 billion on disposable technology over the last 18 months coming into this current school year. What if you'd taken that $1 billion and instead done 10 regional plans, implemented 10 regional plans? Well, first you have to have a plan, which is part of House Bill 5, that hopefully we'll have a plan soon. Have a plan, know how to deploy the resources. But what if we've been able to deploy that $1 billion in 10 rural regions to build out a network that would be lasting technology and lasting infrastructure? And how do we bring those public and private roles together? Private philanthropy, private corporations, independent
corporations and publicly traded groups, to all of us play to our strengths. So again, what's the shared vision, as Alfreda said, and how do we play to our strengths and bring the resources to bear? But you have to want to do that. And I don't know that the want to, I'm hopeful that the want to will remain beyond the next few months.
Nicole, before we go to audience questions, I want to ask you a version of the same thing. So, you are out of the private sector side of this, and, it is wrong to say that the private sector only cares about making money, right? You have investments in your community's success that ultimately may benefit you on the profit side of the conversation, but you care about the communities you serve and your customers. What is the private sector's proper role in this? How should we think about the private sector being a part of the solution where they're not the only ones who benefit?
No, I think everyone's speaking to, I think what we believe here, right, is that this needs to be a collaborative effort. It can't be solved by private alone. It can't be solved by philanthropy alone. It's when it comes together that it is truly meaningful and moves the needle. So I think what Wynn was speaking to about just having accurate maps, the FCC has a huge effort right now that we support on just getting the accurate information on where we need to build out and where there truly is unserved areas, and how do we design, how do we stay agnostic in that approach so that we're pushing forward any type of technology that can help serve that area. I think that's a very important way we can do this. Private, right, does the investment in the infrastructure. I think over the last 25 years, the industry has invested $1 trillion in building out the networks, right? And we continue to make that investment in the networks. And I think when you have, if you take a look at, when we think about the equity question you asked and the disparity, we have programs traditionally that have addressed that for phone service, right? So you have the Lifeline program that's been around for a long time. That program can be modernized. It was to include broadband a few years back, but I think the next step can be taken to really take a look at this program and modernize it so we can keep a sustainable funding source and provide connectivity. E-rate is another program, right, that has done a lot to bring connectivity into schools that can be modernized as well. If you think of the Lifeline program, you think of what SNAP does, providing debit cards. That same approach could be taken for broadband, right? So as individuals are taking advantage, we're participating with the emergency broadband program that's bringing discounted services or free services to individuals subsidized by the government, provided by private providers. You can have a debit card that could be agnostic to provider, but allows an individual to connect and get connectivity. So I think we have models that we can modernize to help connectivity get to everyone.
I love that. So we've got a couple of questions here at the end from our great audience, and so I'm going to go through them quickly. We've got about 5 minutes left. Alfreda, a general question: how do we advance digital literacy in our society? What's your view of that? Obviously, that's a big part of this. We talked about that earlier.
Yeah, gosh, good question. I think all the way from from pre-K to post-secondary, all the way along the way, having a plan. Again, I was mentioning this sort of plan for sustainability and resilience. Yeah. And if we're in a digital economy, then our curriculum, our training programs, and need to reflect the reality of people able to do this. The point is, if you can develop this skill set, you can be adaptive to what comes forward. If you don't develop the skill set, you can't be adaptive. So we have to, educators have to figure out how to put this in curriculums. We have to figure out how to do this in opportunities in gaming even. There are all kinds of ways in which people are honing their digital skill sets. And by the way, boot camps and all those things that are out there, we have all of the ingredients to solve for this. We just have to have the will and the coordination to do it. And if we can show models, because there are things that are working, we can show models that are working, then we can take that to scale with the public dollars that are coming down the pike. So I don't have the answer exactly how to do it. I do know is that there are a lot of people that, number one, are doing it already. Yep. And how do we just learn from that and replicate?
Good. Wynn, quickly, digital divide question from our audience. Digital divide affects older adults. We haven't really talked about age too much. There was a reference to Nicole made to younger people, and that is an element of the equity conversation. But the digital divide affects older adults, especially underserved Black, Hispanic, and Asian adults of a certain age. Can we discuss age-friendly designs built into our tech future that ultimately come at this equity question? Should we be talking about this?
I think we absolutely should be talking about that. It is not a population that receives a lot of attention, but I know from telehealth, telemedicine, very practical things that relate to quality of life, accessing services. I mean, anymore you can't. The answer is, oh well, it's online. Look at the website.
Right.
Well, you have to be comfortable at a minimum accessing services through the web, and two, with adults working longer and longer. At higher ages, there absolutely ought to be opportunities in the future of technology for our older members of our workforce to do so as well. And so I think absolutely something we need to be talking about. It's not something that I hear a lot about in the conversations, though.
Right. Nicole, similar to this last question, how are we addressing the digital divide that affects grandparents who are caring for grandchildren, right? I mean, this is something, again, over the last year, not a new problem, but something that we shined more of a light on as families had to pull together however they could make it work. What about that? I mean, we have non-traditional family units that nonetheless need access to these devices, to connectivity, and to digital literacy. What do we do about that?
Absolutely. I think one of the things we're looking at doing, and we have a collaboration starting with the Public Libraries Association. So we partnered with them to roll out digital literacy training, very basic training, right? So how do you approach email? How do you surf the web? Things that I think many of us take for granted, but are pivotal, needed skills, critical skills, especially when you're dealing with cross generations who are all just trying to make it work in this environment. So I'm excited to see that collaboration come forward. I think our public libraries are an amazing resource. So anything we can do to push out literacy training from that community is helpful. I think our connected community centers, are also a place where every generation can gather. We know grandparents are helping with the teaching. We know aunts and uncles, anyone is stepping in to do that. And it's incredibly frustrating when you have the technology there and you can't access it and your children need it. So I think all those resources are part of what we need to make this successful.
Well, great questions and a great conversation. I see we're back joined by Secretary Spellings. And so that's my time to say to Alfreda Norman and to Wynn Rosser and Nicole Anderson, thank you so much for joining, for being such good panelists, and for the work you're doing in our communities. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. I know we're all pleased to be part of this Future of Tech Commission event. And I'll turn it back over to the Secretary and say thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Evan, and what a terrific conversation with all these panelists. We know that addressing these gaps through greater connectivity and literacy are clearly going to be essential recommendations for our report. To build on this topic, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and Director for the Center for Technology Innovation, to talk about the power of creating digital opportunities for all American students.
Hi, I'm Nicole Turner-Lee. I'm a Senior Fellow in Governance Studies and the Director of the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institution, headquartered in Washington, D.C. I'm also the author of a forthcoming book, Digitally Invisible: How the Internet is Creating the New Underclass, which will be out later this winter from Brookings Press. It's no secret in the last year and some change that we realize how important being connected to the internet really is. Outside of the things that we're all able to do, like see our doctors as well as shop, the most important and probably the most impactful function has been the education of our young people. In particular, in March of last year, we found that 50 million K through 12 students were sent home. And out of that 50 million students, we found that 15 to 16 million of them either lacked home broadband access or a device. And out of that number, 9 million didn't have either. And it's unfortunate to hear that the predominant number of kids that were most affected were Black, brown, and of tribal lands. And today, we potentially suffer the consequence of learning regression, particularly for low-income and rural students. My friends, being connected mattered during the pandemic, and it's going to matter going forward. And that's why I'm proposing, the same way that we instituted the No Child Left Behind Act, that we have something that's bipartisan called No Child Left Offline. As we proceed to reopen our schools, let us not throw out the baby with the bathwater. It is important that our kids, no child left offline, have in their backpacks a tablet as well as a textbook, a hotspot along with a pencil, and curricula for their families to be able to enjoy the internet in a safe mode. This is going to be the game changer on our digital competitiveness as a nation, as we begrudge the learning capacities that our kids were losing. They were also gaining the ability to work independently, collaboratively, and stay on top of 21st century yearnings. We have no choice, my friends, but to reimagine education. It matters too much. And as we come out of this pandemic, I would urge everyone who is listening today, particularly this commission, let's make this reality of no child left behind a possibility. And at the same time, let's recognize that the digital divide is not just about closing it, but it's about creating the other side of it, which are digital opportunities for young people and their households alike. Thank you for having me.
Wow, thank you so much, Nicole. I love No Child Left Offline, as you might expect, because in today's digital age, if you're left offline, you're certainly being left behind. And far too often, it's our most vulnerable and marginalized communities who are left without technology opportunities. Our next panel is going to continue to focus on education and how we can spur innovation and support skill development across the education continuum. Now, I'm happy to introduce my dear friend, Kirk Watson, Dean of the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. Kirk, off to you.
Well, thank you very much, Secretary Spellings, not only for being a part of putting on this wonderful webinar, but also for inviting me to be a part of it. I get the real pleasure today of moderating a panel where, as the Secretary talked about, we're going to talk about how we proliferate technology innovation in education and in our workforce systems. And I'm joined by three true experts. So let me introduce them quickly and we'll get started. Dr. Joe May is the Chancellor of Dallas College. It was previously known as the Dallas County Community College District. Dallas College now serves over 150,000 North Texas students. He'll be joined by Larry Berger, who is the founder and CEO of Amplify Education. Larry co-founded the company in 2000 and has led the invention of mobile software to help early reading teachers and next generation curriculum for elementary and middle schools. And last but not least is Superintendent Pedro Martinez, who's the superintendent of the San Antonio Independent School District. Under his leadership, the district is seeing improved graduation and college going rates, as well as expanded access to rigor. Innovative schools have been developed and launched, providing new models of education. So you can see we've got an excellent panel. And the way I want to start this is really pretty simple. I just want to ask the question heads up. Where are we right now? Where are we with technology in our education and workforce systems? There's a lot of information out there. Are we behind? So let's just start with that. Where are we and are we behind? Joe, why don't you kick us off here?
Well, I wish I had a way to say that we're ahead, but we're not. I do think there's a lot of work to be done. And as we look at it, we talk about it, we really see the challenges in four areas as we look at it. That education is slow to really adapt a software as a service. We are really maintaining old systems, old technology. We're probably the only organizations yet still hire COBOL programmers to handle our work. We also have been slower to adopt digital materials. I look forward to Larry, since I saw his background in the digital learning space. So we see just the internal institutional focus as being a problem. We also see we're behind in multi-institutional and organizational technology. And what I mean by that is education is about the only organizations that haven't developed B2B type of software that's out there for engagement between organizations, which means that handoffs between K-12 and higher education are clunky. Are not digitally connected, are not really built around the needs of either students or the organizations. I would say that the third is that connectivity, which I'm sure has been talked about in other sessions today, where students simply need access to broadband and connectivity technology in order to do the work. So it's an infrastructure issue that I'm sure we can talk about and will be talked about at least. And the fourth, and again, I look forward to Larry's comments here as well, as we see mobility software as also a real challenge in the space, and not just on the learning material side that moves with students, but also the ability for students to utilize their credentials for upward mobility throughout life, of taking advantage of the degrees that they've earned. And hopefully we'll talk about that in more detail as we look at how to address what we see are the four big challenges that are faced today in education.
Excellent. So Larry, why don't you follow up? Give your point of view and comment on not only how you see where we are and whether we're behind, but as we go through this, and Pedro, I'll ask you to do the same thing. Let's kind of comment and grow on where Joe started there.
Yeah, so a lot of things accelerated in terms of technology infrastructure in K-12 because of the pandemic. You could say that since the 90s, we've been talking about wiring the schools and getting devices in kids' hands and bridging the digital divide. And it was starting to seem like maybe we just couldn't do it. We didn't have the national will to get the devices out there. And then it's great to be on with Superintendent Martinez, because he was one of the leaders who just said, we no longer have an excuse about this. We can't do it. We must get devices in the hands of every kid. We must get the connectivity. And I think he succeeded. Everyone at least tried. And even to the point where Google ran out of Chromebooks for a few weeks because the districts were placing such high numbers of orders. And so interestingly, we are now at a place where, with obvious exceptions, the infrastructure, the devices are there, but now we're face to face with the fact that readiness to do great things with that infrastructure is very unevenly distributed. And so the same things that were driving what was a digital divide before, some kids had access, some don't, is still a kind of digital pedagogy divide today, which is some schools, classrooms, homes are using these devices to give kids access to the world, to enable them to make things, to create things, to do analysis at the next level, to access great teaching wherever it might be. And then a lot of classrooms, a lot of districts, a lot of homes, they're delivering digital worksheets, and the kids are in some sense falling further behind in their motivation, because digital worksheets are as boring as regular worksheets, and also just they're not learning what they needed to be learning this year. And digital worksheets, when you're home alone, are particularly unmotivated. So it's really exciting that infrastructure is there. I would say the most exciting thing, and we'll talk about this later, I suspect, is that teachers are no longer ambivalent about, do I need to learn how to teach digitally, or can I do it the old-fashioned way? Teachers all stepped up, and they're now power users, but that doesn't mean the capacity to use it well is there, and that's where we're behind.
Yeah. So as a superintendent on the ground, Superintendent Martinez, what's your reaction on how behind we are well, how behind we are?
Yeah, so sadly, I agree with my colleagues. You know, what's interesting, especially, you know, we serve over 90% of our children live in poverty, and we have one of the highest densities in poverty in the entire state of Texas. And what I could see from my vantage point is districts like mine across the country have never been able to figure out, and there was always hesitation about giving technology to students to allow them to take them home. We always had hesitation from our teachers around how to use technology. What was interesting though, anytime we tried it, all we saw was the demand for technology being very high. So we knew the interest was there once they had a chance to actually play with it, but we just never had the resources. But I think what this pandemic forced all of us to do, so we tell this story all the time, we serve about 48,000 children. We distributed 40,000 devices last spring alone. And we added another 20,000 because some children needed both Chromebooks and iPads, depending on the content we were using. And we did it in 3 weeks. Our original plan was 3 years. And I'm embarrassed to say that, because now that I think about that, you know, it's not a point of pride. It's like, why was I going to take 3 years? But I realized that's where all my colleagues were at, whether it was a resource issue, an execution issue, getting the will of the students and parents and the staff, whatever that is. But it was a lot of, we all have good reasons for it, maybe good excuses, you could even say. But the good news now, and I agree with Larry, we're now at a place where I see it as we're in the first part of the relay race. It's a multiple stage relay race. So we got it to the first one. But the sad part is children with means have always had technology at home, multiple devices. So if anything, we're starting to close that gap. And I think we're getting very creative around the country and here in Texas, particularly on how to do it. But I do think we have to recognize it's a multi-stage relay race. And so we're nowhere near, I don't even know what the end looks like.
It's interesting to listen to these answers, and because the COVID, the pandemic moment that I've actually talked about that in the past, the pandemic that causes us all to kind of pause and ask, listening to you talk about the difference, between what you were able to do in 3 years. We don't want to go back to the way it was. So I'm going to ask the question slightly differently than I asked the first question. I'm going to start with you, Pedro, if you don't mind. And that is, we know we're behind. A lot of the answers suggest the reasons we're behind, but what is the next step coming out of this pandemic so that we don't go back? I mean, if we're behind, why and what do we want to make sure we don't do in the next step?
So here's what I would say, Kirk. So one, we all talk about going back to normal. Let's not talk about going back. Normal wasn't that great for a lot of our kids.
Yeah, that's my point.
In poverty. And so let's just call it what it is, number one. Number two, let's make a commitment. And I'm seeing it at the national level. I'm seeing it at the state level. I'm seeing it amongst my colleagues. Let's make a commitment that going forward, under our watch, we will never have a child that will not have a device that they'll be able to take home. Under our watch in the community colleges and the universities, a child will always have a device, however we get it done. And then what I change is at all levels of government to support it. And I think the will now to do it, because I agree with Larry. I mean, I've been struggling with this for so long, and it almost did feel like it was just like, it's just this huge mountain that I got to just incrementally climb. Well, guess what? We're now at a big part, we're not on top of the mountain yet. But again, we made a huge stride very quickly because we were forced to. Because an avalanche was coming and you had to step out of the way and you had to go up. You couldn't go down, you had to go up. So now let's start looking at the next stage and then really be thoughtful. And then one thing that I'll just end with is that I am so inspired by how my teachers jumped in. Because at the end of the day, they love their kids. And so when they saw that technology was a means to better serve their children, they jumped in full force, and God bless them. Some of them stumbled, but you know what? They stuck with it. And so I think, Kirk, we have an interesting thing going on now where we have that desire, that will that we've got to take advantage of.
I appreciate that, and Larry, he riffed a little bit off of what you had said in your original answer, where I wrote down, you asked the question, do we have the will? And that's what he's referring to. So let me shift as we go through the rest of this. How if that's the first step, and if you agree or disagree, go ahead and say it. But if that's the first step, so that we don't go back to normal, as Pedro points out, how do we do this and how do we do it right? I mean, what's the proper framework? Let's assume that we're going to come up with the will and we're going to work to do that. But what's the proper framework for proliferating this technology and innovation into our education system? And Larry, I'll come to you, and then Joe, I'm going to ask you the same question. Larry, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So the first thing we have to do is get rid of those mute buttons, because this is happening in the education process. I think, again, building on what Superintendent Martinez just said, the biggest change to me is not just the infrastructure, it's that the professionals of education, the teachers, are now not on the sidelines, technology hesitant, but are actually in the fray, and they've become power users. They are now asking for the technology to get better. They are complaining about important things, including one of the things that came up at the very beginning, I've got 8 different systems. Each of them has a different password, has a different username, has a different, like, these systems need to start flying in formation. No corporate software world would ask people to log in 9 times a day and find the homework submitted in a different system than kids did the work in and the assessment data somewhere else. So there's an integration, coherence, excellence effort that needs to happen. But the big difference is teachers are driving it now. They are saying, you have to fix this by the fall. I need a better system for this. I need a better. And so I have a lot of confidence that it used to be experts sitting in the central office and people in companies like mine saying, what do we do about getting these systems in place when the teachers are kind of ambivalent about them? And a small percentage of them love them, but a bigger percentage of them don't. Now the teachers are all in. They get it. They want to be face-to-face teaching kids without any technology. And I want, despite what I do in ed tech, I want them there too. But they are now excellent consumers of ed tech, and they're going to drive demand in a way that will cause improvement. So I'm confident that maybe the most important thing we need to do is start listening to them. They weren't the voice of ed tech before, they are now.
Joe, talk a little bit about that, particularly from your perspective at Dallas College.
Yeah, you know, it's and boy, I appreciate the perspective, because it really brings together the two things we see. One, we're describing this has really been while certainly technology is central to the conversation, it's really about people and how we're engaging our people and bringing technology and people together. And everyone is exactly right. The pandemic accelerated those conversations in ways that we wouldn't have anticipated it, but yet that kind of puts the pressure back on us. And I like what Pedro said earlier, that we can't look at us returning to normal. In other words, not back to the status quo. And you know, this is where I do think, and I know we'll talk about this more, but policy comes together, funding comes together, all of this around decision making, because unfortunately, funding leans toward the status quo and the past. Policy leans toward the status quo and the past. And there's really little incentives ever put in to risk in the educational setting. That's the great news about the pandemic. We finally had an environment where it was okay to take risk. It was okay to try things that we had never done before. It was okay to be wrong and to learn in this environment. And I just wake up every day praying and thinking that lists don't lose what we've learned. You know, we stand at I think an important moment in time, which will determine if we take advantage of this opportunity and build off of it, or if we slide back to the way things were. And the tendency is going to do that. I'll refer to with your former hat as senator from a policy side there, Kurt, because the policies, unfortunately, and you and I have talked about this in your former role, always work against innovation, change, and sometimes just common sense as it relates to the future, while maintaining the status quo. And I think that's the greatest risk we face right now.
Yeah, I really take your point. Believe me. Well, let me, Joe, I'm gonna go back to you real quick, because as you talk about, you know, how we do this right and the proper framework, and let's talk a little bit about the role that policymakers ought to play. You just did that, so I want to underline that and highlight it a second. What should be the role of the various players, and how here the way I'm dividing that up, at least in my head for this question, is what's the proper role for the federal government to make sure we don't go back and we have incentives, or the state government or local governments? Talk a little bit about that. And Pedro, I'm going to come to you, and Larry, you as well.
Yeah, let me, and thanks so much for that, because, you know, on one hand, leadership can't be legislated, but what we can do is really nudge and encourage and support a little bit of risk taking in the process. You know, policy tends to be very transactional in terms of how it sees the world. And frankly, often overly prescriptive and one size fits all. As we get into the space when we're trying to be innovative, that really means that we need some flexibility. We need some support for innovation that takes place, and that's really at all levels. And you know, the first way I would say, you know, one simple thing that could really help with this is align federal and state resources to support partnerships and collaboration. I think just simply bringing together both the private sector to the public sector, partners in different ways can really help us figure it out. And give us some flexibility even in the procurement process. You think the procurement process, of course, is designed to protect the assets, but it makes it generally impossible to bring in innovative technologies, new approaches, different ways of doing things, because often they don't fit neatly in the boxes, particularly those technologies that are designed to operate in what I call the dotted lines, the ones that are working really in the areas that haven't been addressed before, that don't fall neatly into the boxes. And I'll give one more that we deal with in higher education, and that's FERPA reform at the federal level. We need it to be a lot more like HIPAA. FERPA has been weaponized, misused, mischaracterized, so that we, instead of allowing us to share data and work collaboratively, it ends up being a wall, a barrier between organizations. And happy to elaborate more on any of those. But the good news is there is one that we're dealing with, I think, finally, and that's the technology infrastructure in a meaningful way at both the federal and state levels.
So Superintendent Martinez, talk a little bit about what the role you see of the various levels of policy making.
Yeah, so Kurt, so for example, one of the things we did in our district pre-pandemic is we had started the implementation of our own fiber network in our district boundaries. So across every square inch of my district, we now have our fiber that we laid down and we just lit up. And one of my frustrations was I have amazing access for my schools, for my school buildings, but I couldn't give any access to my families. And so do a workaround working with the city of San Antonio where they leverage their traffic lights, some of their own towers, and my own network. And we had to find loopholes in the law to try to get access to my kids, you know, I mean, during the pandemic. So to Joe's point, I shouldn't have had to do that. And we were doing the right thing. We weren't trying to. So one is just, you know, from the FCC down to the states and the cities, making it easier for us to just accomplish that simple goal of leveraging our resources to give access to our children, and then working with the private sector. So the state and the city were amazing and working with the private sector companies so that we got our kids internet plans for less than $10 a month, which, by the way, the state and city are paying for the first year. And then we'll work with our families to figure out who needs more help beyond that. But now we're going to hopefully be able to use E-rate funding to start going down that path. But again, working with the FCC, it is just, I mean, it's getting better, but it historically has been almost a nightmare because it's, you know, it's just, we can't even, you know, we can't provide our families access. So again, for me on the policy side, that just needs to change.
Hopefully, like we've been talking and y'all have been talking, hopefully the lessons learned during this big time out of the pandemic will get translated into that. So Larry, let me shift gears slightly as I come to you now. If you could wave a magic wand based upon what you know and what we're hearing from your co-panelists here, if you could wave a magic wand, what are the 3 to 5 things that you would immediately do that are the most important things, at least in your head, that need to happen in the next 5 years as we come out of this to move us forward?
Yeah, great. and I want that magic wand. So if, I'll start with that point I made about teachers. I think we now have the consumers driving demand. They are saying, I want systems that do these things, and I need them to talk to each other. And that is going to drive a lot if we can fix the procurement barriers, and if we can change the way that demand expresses itself in education, which is often some top-down requirement filters through a district office instead of a teacher in a classroom saying, I need this thing. On the other hand, a million teachers in classrooms saying I need this thing as separate voices also doesn't help tech providers like me and other innovators know what to build. And so it's simultaneously listening to grassroots folks, and it is having systems of demand aggregation so that those problems that Superintendent Martinez is solving, he's not solving in isolation. He's not saying, what do I do with this fiber? And I know that he had to figure it out himself and talk to the connectivity providers himself. But of course, the neighboring districts had the same problem, and we just didn't figure out what was the mechanism to aggregate demand. And in the tech world, there's a thing we talk about a lot, which is the importance of standards. We all have Wi-Fi on our phone and our laptop, because if we use different standards to connect to networks, then each time you showed up at Starbucks, you'd have to say, oh, I need a new piece of hardware.
Yeah.
In education, we try to have standards, and then it falls apart on the politics of it. And Texas has a different set of standards than many of the other states, and the states temporarily agreed on some, and it's devolving. But if you want to have innovation move quickly, you don't need federally mandated top-down standards. The Wi-Fi standard wasn't written by the government, but you need people with shared interests coming together to figure out, how do we define a standard so that I can build something for San Antonio ISD and it will play in Dallas as well? And that's a missing piece in a lot of ed tech right now. We just have to figure out the ways to aggregate demand. And I think what those teachers who are now good consumers are asking for is very consistent. So we just need to capture what they're saying, figure out how to weave it into a new generation of procurement. And then again, the big breakthrough is that the infrastructure is there much more than it ever was. And there are federal dollars, maybe more than people would have asked for all up front, but there are ways to spread it out into rational plans for the next few years. So the excuse that is, yeah, we'd love to do that, but we can't afford it, I think is weaker now than it's been in the past.
It's interesting that's the part of your answer and where you just ended. But one of the questions we've gotten from the audience, and I'm going to, with y'all's permission, I'm going to move to a few of the questions from the audience here as we kind of wind up this panel. But one of the questions was, there are billions in federal funds coming to schools across the country. And of course, we know that's happening in Texas as well. How should those funds be used to not only address COVID learning loss, but also improve tech skills too? Joe, why don't you take a stab at that first?
Sure. And one, I really, I wake up every day thinking about this question because you're right. Texas is getting billions of dollars of federal dollars. Unfortunately, some of our policymakers look at this, well, how can we offset operating dollars and use these federal dollars instead? Just the opposite of how we need to be thinking. In other words, how can we take something that provides opportunity for innovation, change, and make it fit the old model that's out there? And we have to resist that and push back. And K-12 is Pedro. You guys are feeling it intensely. You're in the battle of that right now. And if we succumb to that, we've just squandered the opportunity, which is just a tragedy in my opinion. So let's doggone it. Let's take advantage of certainly it's a terrible situation in which many people have found themselves, but we can learn, leverage, innovate, and come out of this better and smarter as a result of it. Let's not dumb ourselves down as we do this. Secondly, I would say that's probably enough, but let me go on, because what we are also seeing at the same time, and this has been exacerbated in higher education, as individuals have stopped a little bit looking at colleges in other words, in the past, they may pick Dallas College and come and take all their courses there with us and get their degree. But now they're taking an a la carte approach in many cases, and the system is just not designed to do that. There is very little interoperability, much less transferability within these systems that allow students to easily navigate like they've become accustomed to doing in every other aspect of their life. Now, this is not necessarily a K-12 issue, but it's going to affect people throughout life as they're going to now become more and more independent, because when you're learning remotely, when you're engaging remotely, geography doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where that campus is located anymore. I can pick up a course in Atlanta, in Dallas, and Phoenix all at the same time. The fact that an institution doesn't recognize those courses is, I think, problematic for our future.
We've seen that problem in other ways, but it's becoming more of a problem in this way as well. Superintendent Martinez, let me ask you a question that the audience has put out there. It's pretty straightforward about, are our schools offering enough technology courses? And if they're not, how can we ensure those schools meeting the tech needs of the future? I mean, we've been focused on how we get tech working with the schools, but are we offering enough technology courses going forward for them?
Now, we need to do more, Kirk. I mean, a good example is, we're starting to do more advanced placement classes in computer science. We're starting to do our career tech programs have a richness now, an infusion of technology, because we know those are the jobs of the future. So I think and that was pre-COVID. I mean, so for us, we need to double down on that. And again, to my colleagues, we have resources now, and we got to just remove the excuse. I mean, the one thing that I'm telling my colleagues across the country, do not be hesitant. Yes, it's one-time money, but it's one-time money for over 3 years. So it's not one-time money like it's like next year. So be bold, be aggressive, try things. Our teachers are doing it now. They're taking risks. God bless them. Again, they came into this sometimes falling down, and they pick themselves right back up. So this is a time for us to be bold.
Larry, I want to ask one last question for you, and then we're going to turn it back over to the secretary, but it relates to how we assist young adults that are out, they're in school in rural areas with little tech training. How do we teach them as well? We've kind of focused on urban areas during this discussion, but answer that question for us in the audience. You're on mute still. You still haven't lost that mute button.
I did it again. Connectivity should be a boon, right? It takes a smaller rural community and gives it access to the world. But we are having trouble getting broadband everywhere in the country still. I think this is a question about the way that we talked about infrastructure, just like it is time, we can do it. I think there is money being put in the stimulus, so we just have to get it done. And then it comes down to that question about, well, what's the social capital in that community to learn to be a software developer? Is there a summer internship in a software company in a rural town? Probably not. So how do we make sure kids are getting connected to the world? And the great thing is that the corporate world, the place where these software jobs are, has learned to work remotely, has decided that its workforce is no longer, as was the case for me in Brooklyn, New York, its workforce is wherever we can find a talented person. And so our summer internship program this year is much more geographically diverse. When a kid in rural Kansas applies, we're like, great, we're all, up until September, we're all working from home still anyway. And so you're as much a part of the team in Kansas as if you were in Brooklyn. And so I think there are opportunities like that as the workforce changes, where we really need to connect kids to the fact that the world is full of possibilities for them, even if they're in a small town where those opportunities are not just down the street.
Great. Well, let me say to each of you, Joe, Pedro, Larry, you create great optimism that we can do this the right way moving forward, and for people who practice it the way you do, that adds to my optimism. So thank you very much for not only being a part of this panel, but for what you do just day to day to make a difference. And with that, Secretary Spellings, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Kirk, that was fantastic. Thanks to you and your terrific panel. This past year has left us no doubt about the link between education and technology, and we absolutely must do a better job of solving for these issues to make sure that we have a thriving U.S. economy. One community where the opportunities to address the digital divide are often gone underappreciated is the one including Americans with disabilities. And it's my pleasure to introduce our final speaker, Dr. Stephanie Coughlin, professor in the College of Education at the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you, Stephanie, for providing this important perspective.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you today, and thank you for valuing a disabled perspective. To me, the key to the future of inclusive technology is access. However, I often see people with disabilities are missing from the conversation surrounding inclusion, diversity, and equity. Disability impacts everyone. Really, at any given time, there's an estimated 20% of us who have some type of disability. For example, there are learning disabilities, people who are deaf, people with low vision, those who have mental health issues, people on the autism perspective, those experiencing PTSD. Those different experiences all come with disabilities, and sometimes people are born with them. They can be an acquired disability. It could be a temporary or a permanent disability. Any of these things can happen. When I teach my courses at the University of Texas, some students disclose or share their disability with me right from the beginning. But often I notice that they delay that until much later, simply because of their experience facing negative attitudes surrounding disabilities. Often young people with disabilities will say that they see a lot of negative attitudes about their ability and their future and what they're capable of. Within my research, we call this the tyranny of low expectations. We see a high percentage of disabled people who are under or unemployed. For example, some disabled people may be stocking shelves overnight in a grocery store instead of on the management track, with promotion abilities and opportunities coming later for them. Our economy really struggles with those people not working to their full potential. That's really key. Access is more than simply accommodations. It's also attitudes and the possibility for being flexible for everyone. At the end of the day, it's about full representation with disabled people being part of the development of technology and being on those teams and in those discussions. Accessible technology is central to the quality of education. I recently presented at South by Southwest, and the teachers who were in that session were really concerned, and they shared these thoughts about their disabled students because access to technology is just not there. Online support is just not there. Often, there's an overlap between poverty and disability, and it's a high percentage. And often, that's a barrier, and access itself is a barrier that they experience. Accessible technology, again, is central to the readiness of our workforce. The work pool and the talent pool that we have is huge within the disabled community, but often it's untapped and underutilized. Inclusive technology creates pathways for opportunities for a stronger, more diverse workforce. So what can this commission do? You can continue to value the perspective of disability. It is critical. Keep those people within the dialogue. Follow their recommendations in terms of how to address those systemic barriers that they face on a daily basis. encourage technology innovation, and that includes accessibility considerations from the beginning, not after the fact. Accommodations are good, certainly. However, an inclusive design approach is far better. This saves us time, it saves money, it saves energy for everyone. The third thing to really keep in mind is access includes supports for the context and the environment surrounding the individual, their caregivers, their family, their teachers, especially people who did not grow up as digital natives. This is key. And how do we support those people in their lives? Each of us can improve accessibility within our work, our community, and in our homes. It's not only about ADA compliance, it's more than that. Access and including those thoughts really is beneficial to everyone. So in sum, today, please just remember this. Inclusion is nothing without access. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, for providing this important perspective, especially the reminder about the tyranny of low expectations and the need for inclusion as well as accessibility. I want to thank all of you for being part of today's discussion, for your questions and poll responses. These are fascinating, complicated issues that will take time to discuss and explore. This morning, we heard from smart leaders about what we need to think about to chart the right path to keep our nation not just competitive, but a global leader in education, innovation, and inclusion in the digital age. This afternoon, you'll receive a link to the Commission's online form to provide more detailed feedback on the 5 aspects of tech policy the Commission is studying. So please look for that and respond. We need your voice. Finally, thanks to my team at Texas 2036 and our friends at Common Sense, who made this event possible. And if you're interested in attending future town halls on other subjects, you can see a full schedule on our website, futureoftechcommission.org. Thank you all and have a great day.